Why is Sex Fun? The Evolution of Human Sexuality by Jared Diamond. Reviews follow. Diane Ackerman, author of A Natural History of the Senses, says, "Why is Sex Fun?" is the best book on the subject I've read. This lively exploration of our sexual heritage offers fascinating reading for anyone curious about why lovers do what they do. Roger Scholl, professor of physiology, Monash University in Australia, says, "I am so jealous of Jared Diamond, for he writes with such an elegant simplicity. Here, he takes a look at the endlessly fascinating topic of human sexuality, has convincing arguments should persuade them that there are very special reasons why we evolved to use sex for recreation as well as for procreating, whereas most other mammals are denied that pleasure." It is a great little book by one of the world's foremost biological philosophers. Bataille Xntavels, author of Naked to the Bone, Medical Imaging in the 20th Century, says, "Once again Jared Diamond provides us with answers to questions we may never have stopped to ask, but wish we had." In this long essay, Diamond explains that recreational sex, while not unique to humans, is a rare behavior in the animal world. Above all, we learn, sexual activity divorced from procreation is not only part of what it is to be human, but the very crux of our evolutionary success. Why is Sex Fun? The Evolution of Human Sexuality by Jared Diamond. Preface. The subject of sex preoccupies us. It's the source of our most intense pleasures. Often it's also the cause of misery, much of which arises from built-in conflicts between the evolved roles of women and men. This book is a speculative account of how human sexuality came to be the way it now is. Most of us don't realize how unusual human sexual practices are compared to those of all other living animals. Scientists infer that the sex life of even our recent ape-like ancestors was very different from ours today. Some distinctive evolutionary forces must have operated on our ancestors to make us different. What were those forces, and what really is so bizarre about us? Understanding how our sexuality evolved is fascinating not only in its own right, but also in order to understand our other distinctively human features. Those features include our culture, speech, parent-child relations, and mastery of complex tools. While paleontologists usually attribute the evolution of these features to our attainment of large brains and upright posture, I argue that our bizarre sexuality was equally essential for their evolution. Among the unusual aspects of human sexuality that I discuss are female menopause, the role of men in human societies, having sex in private, often having sex for fun rather than for procreation, and the expansion of women's breasts even before use in lactation. To the layperson, these features all seem almost too natural to require explanation. On reflection, though, they prove surprisingly difficult to account for. I'll also discuss the function of men's penises, and the reasons women, but not men, nurse their babies. The answers to these two questions seem utterly obvious. Within even these questions, though, lurk baffling unsolved problems. Reading this book will not teach you new positions for enjoying intercourse, nor will it help you reduce the discomfort of menstrual cramps or menopause. It will not abolish the pain of discovering that your spouse is having an affair, neglecting your joint child, or neglecting you in favor of your child. But this book may help you understand why your body feels the way it does, and why your beloved is behaving the way he or she is. Perhaps, too, if you understand why you feel driven to some self-destructive sexual behavior, that understanding may help you to gain distance from your instincts, and to deal more intelligently with them. Earlier versions of material in some chapters appeared as articles in Discover and Natural History magazines. It is a pleasure to acknowledge my debt to many scientist colleagues for discussions and comments, to Roger Short and Nancy Wayne for their scrutiny of the whole manuscript, to Ellen Modecki for the illustrations, and to John Brockman for the invitation to write this book. Jared Diamond. Why is Sex Fun? Chapter 1. The Animal with the Weirdest Sex Life. Section 1. If your dog had your brain and could speak, and if you asked it what it thought of your sex life, you might be surprised by its response. It would be something like this: "Those disgusting humans have sex any day of the month." Barbara proposes sex even when she knows perfectly well that she isn't fertile, like just after her period. John is eager for sex all the time, without caring whether his efforts could result in a baby or not. But if you want to hear something really gross, Barbara and John kept on having sex while she was pregnant. That's as bad as all the times when John's parents come for a visit, and I can hear them two having sex, although John's mother went through this thing they call menopause years ago. Now she can't have babies anymore, but she still wants sex, and John's father obliges her. What a waste of effort. Here's the weirdest thing of all: Barbara and John's parents close the bedroom door and have sex in private, instead of doing it in front of their friends, like any self-respecting dog. To understand where your dog is coming from, you need to free yourself from your human-based perspective on what constitutes normal sexual behavior. Increasingly today, we consider it narrow-minded and despicably prejudiced to denigrate those who do not conform to our own standards. Each such form of narrow-mindedness is associated with a despicable ism, for instance, racism, sexism, Eurocentrism, and phallocentrism. To that list of modern ism sins, defenders of animal rights are now adding the sin of species ism. Our standards of sexual conduct are especially warped, speciesist, and human-centric because human sexuality is so abnormal by the standards of the world's 30 million other animal species. It's also abnormal by the standards of the world's millions of species of plants, fungi, and microbes, but I'll ignore that broader perspective because I haven't yet worked through my own zoocentrism. This book confines itself to the insights that we can gain into our sexuality merely by broadening our perspective to encompass other animal species. As a beginning, let's consider normal sexuality by the standards of the world's approximately 4,300 species of mammals, of which we humans are just one. Most mammals do not live as a nuclear family of a mated adult male and adult female, caring jointly for their offspring. Instead, in many mammal species both adult males and adult females are solitary, at least during the breeding season, and meet only to copulate. Hence, males do not provide paternal care; their sperm is their sole contribution to their offspring, and to their temporary mate. Even most social mammal species, such as lions, wolves, chimpanzees, and many hoofed mammals, are not paired off within the herd/pride/pack/band into male/female couples. Within such a herd/pride/etc., each adult male shows no signs of recognizing specific infants as his offspring, by devoting himself to them at the expense of other infants in the herd. Indeed, it is only within the last few years that scientists studying lions, wolves, and chimpanzees have begun to figure out, with the help of DNA testing, which male sired which infant. However, like all generalizations, these admit exceptions. Among the minority of adult male mammals that do offer their offspring paternal care are polygamous male zebras and gorillas with harems of females, male gibbons paired off with females as solitary couples, and saddle-backed tamarin monkeys, of which 2 adult males are kept as a harem by one polyandrous adult female. Sex in social mammals is generally carried out in public, before the gazes of other members of the troop. For instance, a female Barbary macaque estrus copulates with every adult male in her troop, and makes no effort to conceal each copulation from other males. The best documented exception to this pattern of public sex is in chimpanzee troops, where an adult male and estrus female may go off by themselves for a few days on what human observers term a consortship. However, the same female chimpanzee that has private sex with a consort may also have public sex with other adult male chimpanzees within the same estrus cycle. Adult females of most mammal species use various means of conspicuously advertising the brief phase of their reproductive cycle, when they are ovulating, and can be fertilized. The advertisement may be visual, for instance, the area around the vagina turning bright red, olfactory, releasing a distinctive smell, auditory, making noises, or behavioral, crouching in front of an adult male, and displaying the vagina. Females solicit sex only during those fertile days, are sexually unattractive or less attractive to males on other days, because they lack the arousing signals, and rebuff the advances of any male that is nevertheless interested on other days. Thus, sex is emphatically not just for fun, and is rarely divorced from its function of fertilization. This generalization too admits exceptions. Sex is flagrantly separated from reproduction in a few species, including bonobos, pygmy chimpanzees, and dolphins. Finally, the existence of menopause as a regular phenomenon is not well established for most wild mammal populations. By menopause is meant a complete cessation of fertility within a time span that is much briefer than the previous fertile career, and that is followed by an infertile lifespan of significant length. Instead, wild mammals either are still fertile at the time of death, or else exhibit gradually diminishing fertility with advancing age. Now contrast what I have just said about normal mammalian sexuality with human sexuality. The following human attributes are among those that we take for granted as normal. 1. Most men and women in most human societies end up in a long-term pair relationship, marriage, that other members of the society recognize as a contract involving mutual obligations. The couple has sex repeatedly, and mainly, or exclusively with each other. 2. In addition to being a sexual union, marriage is a partnership for joint rearing of the resulting babies. In particular, human males as well as females commonly provide parental care. 3. Despite forming a couple, or occasionally a harem, a husband and wife, or wives, do not live, like gibbons, as a solitary couple, in an exclusive territory that they defend against other couples, but instead they live embedded in a society of other couples with whom they cooperate economically, and share access to communal territory. 4. Marriage partners usually have sex in private, rather than being indifferent to the presence of other humans. 5. Human ovulation is concealed rather than advertised. That is, women's brief period of fertility around the time of ovulation is difficult to detect for their potential sex partners as well as for most women themselves. A woman's sexual receptivity extends beyond the time of fertility to encompass most or all of the menstrual cycle. Hence, most human copulations occur at time unsuitable for conception. That is, human sex is mostly for fun, not for insemination. 6. All women who live past the age of 40 or 50 undergo menopause, a complete shutdown of fertility. Men in general do not undergo menopause. While individual men may develop fertility problems at any age, there is no age clumping of infertility or universal shutdown. Norms imply violation of norms. We call something a norm merely because it is more frequent than its opposite, the violation of the norm. That's as true for human sexual norms as for other norms. Readers of the last 2 pages will surely have been thinking of exceptions to the supposed generalizations that I have been describing, but they still stand as generalizations. For example, even in societies that recognize monogamy by law or custom, there is much extramarital and premarital sex, and much sex that is not part of a long-term relationship. Humans do engage in one-night stands. On the other hand, most humans also engage in many-year, or many-decade stands, whereas tigers and orangutans engage in nothing except one-night stands. The genetically based paternity tests developed over the last half-century have shown that the majority of American, British, and Italian babies are indeed sired by the husband, or steady boyfriend, of the baby's mother. Readers may also bristle at hearing human societies described as monogamous. The term harem, which zoologists apply to zebras and gorillas, is taken from the Arabic word for a human institution. Yes, many humans practice sequential monogamy. Yes, polygamy, long-term simultaneous unions between one man and multiple wives, is legal in some countries today, and polyandry, long-term simultaneous unions between one woman and multiple husbands is legal in a few societies. In fact, polygamy was accepted in the great majority of traditional human societies before the rise of state institutions. However, even in officially polygamous societies, most men have only one wife at a time, and only especially wealthy men can acquire and maintain a few wives simultaneously. The large harems that spring to mind at the mention of the word polygamy, such as those of recent Arabian and Indian royalty, are possible only in the state-level societies that arose very late in human evolution, and that permitted a few men to concentrate great wealth. Hence the generalization stands: most adults in most human societies are at any given moment involved in a long-term pair bond that is often monogamous in practice as well as legally. Still another cause for bristling may have been my description of human marriage as a partnership for the joint rearing of the resulting babies. Most children receive more parental care from their mothers and from their fathers. Unwed mothers form a significant proportion of the adult population in some modern societies, though it has been much harder for unwed mothers to rear children successfully in traditional societies. But the generalization again holds: most human children receive some parental care from their father, in the form of child care, teaching, protection, and provision of food, housing, and money. All these features of human sexuality, long-term sexual partnerships, co-parenting, proximity to the sexual partnerships of others, private sex, concealed ovulation, extended female receptivity, sex for fun, and female menopause constitute what we humans assume as normal sexuality. It titillates, amuses, or disgusts us to read of the sexual habits of elephant seals, marsupial mice, or orangutans, whose lives are so different from ours. Their lives seem to us bizarre. But that proves to be a speciesist interpretation. By the standards of the world's 4,300 other species of mammals, and even by the standards of our own closest relatives, the great apes, the chimpanzee, bonobo, gorilla, and orangutan, we are the ones who are bizarre. However, I am still being worse and zoocentric. I am falling into the even narrower trap of mammallocentrism. Do we become more normal when judged by the standards of non-mammalian animals? Other animals do exhibit a wider range of sexual and social systems than do mammals alone. Whereas the young of most mammal species receive maternal care, but no paternal care, the reverse is true for some species of birds, frogs, and fish, in which the father is the sole caretaker for his offspring. The male is a parasitic appendage fused to the female's body. In some species of deep-sea fish, he is eaten by the female immediately after copulation, in some species of spiders and insects. While humans and most other mammal species breed repeatedly, salmon, octopus, and many other animal species practice what is termed Big Bang reproduction, or simulparity, a single reproductive effort, followed by pre-programmed death. The mating system of some species of birds, frogs, fish, and insects, as well as some bats and antelope, resembles a single spar at a traditional site, termed olek. Many males maintain stations and compete for the attention of visiting females, each of which chooses a mate, often the same preferred male chosen by many other females, copulates with him, and then goes off to rear the resulting offspring, without his assistance. Among other animal species, it is possible to point out some whose sexuality resembles ours in particular respects. Most European and North American bird species form pair bonds that last for at least one breeding season, in some cases for life, and the father as well as the mother cares for the young. While most such bird species differ from us in that pairs occupy mutually exclusive territories, most species of seabirds resemble us further in that mated pairs breed colonially in close proximity to each other. However, all these bird species differ from us in that ovulation as advertised, female receptivity, and the sex act are mostly confined to the fertile period around ovulation. Sex is not recreational, and economic cooperation between pairs is slight or non-existent. Bonobo, pygmy chimpanzees, resemble or approach us in many of these latter respects. Female receptivity is extended through several weeks of the estrous cycle. Sex is mainly recreational, and there is some economic cooperation between many members of the band. However, bonobos still lack our pair-bonded couples, our well-concealed ovulation, and our paternal recognition of and care for offspring. Most or all of these species differ from us in lacking a well-defined female menopause. Thus, even a non-mammalocentric view reinforces our dog's interpretation. We are the ones who are bizarre. We marvel at what seems to us the weird behavior of peacocks and Big Bang marsupial mice, but those species actually fall securely within the range of animal variation, and in fact we are the weirdest of them all. Zoologists theorize about why hammer-headed fruit bats evolved their mating system. Yet the mating system that cries out for explanation is our own. Why did we evolve to be so different? This question becomes even more acute when we compare ourselves with our closest relatives among the world's mammal species, the great apes, as distinguished from the gibbons, or little apes. Closest of all are Africa's chimpanzee and bonobo, from which we differ in only about 1.6% of our nuclear genetic material, DNA. Nearly as close are the gorilla, 2.3% genetic difference from us, and the orangutan of Southeast Asia, 3.6% different. Our ancestors diverged only about 7 million years ago from the ancestors of chimpanzees and bonobos, 9 million years ago from the ancestors of gorillas, and 14 million years ago from the ancestors of orangutans. That sounds like an enormous amount of time in comparison to an individual human lifetime, but it's a mere blink on the evolutionary time scale. Life has existed on Earth for more than 3 billion years, and hard-shelled, complex large animals exploded in diversity more than 500 million years ago. Within that relatively short period during which our ancestors, and the ancestors of our great ape relatives have been evolving separately, we have diverged in only a few significant respects, and to a modest degree, even though some of those modest differences, especially our upright posture and larger brains, have had enormous consequences for our behavioral differences. Along with posture and brain size, sexuality completes the trinity of the decisive respects in which the ancestors of humans and great apes diverged. Orangutans are often solitary, males and females associate just to copulate, and males provide no paternal care. A gorilla male gathers a harem of a few females, with each of which he has sex at intervals of several years, after the female weans her most recent offspring and resumes menstrual cycling, and before she becomes pregnant again. And chimpanzees and bonobos live in troops with no lasting male-female pair bonds or specific father-offspring bonds. It is clear how our large brain and upright posture played a decisive role in what is termed our humanity, in the fact that we now use language, read books, watch TV, buy or grow most of our food, occupy all continents and oceans, keep members of our own and other species in cages, and are exterminating most other animal and plant species, while the great apes still speechlessly gather wild fruit in the jungle, occupy small ranges in the old world tropics, cage no animal, and threaten the existence of no other species. What role did our weird sexuality play in our achieving these hallmarks of humanity? Could our sexual distinctiveness be related to our other distinctions from the great apes? In addition to, and probably ultimately, as a product of our upright posture and large brains, those distinctions include our relative hairlessness, dependence on tools, command of fire, and development of language, art, and writing. If any of these distinctions predisposed us toward evolving our sexual distinctions, the links are certainly unclear. For example, it is not obvious why our loss of body hair should have made recreational sex more appealing, nor why our command of fire should have favored menopause. Instead, I shall argue the reverse. Recreational sex and menopause were as important for our development of fire, language, art, and writing as were our upright posture and large brains. Jared Diamond. Why is sex fun? Chapter 1. The animal with the weirdest sex life. Section 2. The key to understanding human sexuality is to recognize that it is a problem in evolutionary biology. When Darwin recognized the phenomenon of biological evolution in his great book on the origin of species, most of his evidence was drawn from anatomy. He inferred that most plant and animal structures evolve, that is, they tend to change from generation to generation. He also inferred that the major force behind evolutionary change is natural selection. By that term, Darwin meant that plants and animals vary in their anatomical adaptations, that certain adaptations enable individuals bearing them to survive and reproduce more successfully than other individuals, and that those particular adaptations therefore increase in frequency in a population from generation to generation. Later biologists showed that Darwin's reasoning about anatomy also applies to physiology and biochemistry, and animals or plants' physiological and biochemical characteristics also adapted to certain lifestyles, and evolve in response to environmental conditions. More recently, evolutionary biologists have shown that animal social systems also evolve and adapt. Even among closely related animal species, some are solitary, others live in small groups, and still others live in large groups. But social behavior has consequences for survival and reproduction. Depending, for example, on whether a species' food supply is clumped or spread out, and on whether a species faces high risk of attack by predators, either solitary living or group living may be better for promoting survival and reproduction. Similar considerations apply to sexuality. Some sexual characteristics may be more advantageous for survival and reproduction than others, depending on each species' food supply, exposure to predators, and other biological characteristics. At this point I shall mention just one example, a behavior that at first seems diametrically opposed to evolutionary logic: sexual cannibalism. The male of some species of spiders and mantises is routinely eaten by his mate just after or even while he is copulating with her. This cannibalism clearly involves the male's consent, because the male of these species approaches the female, makes no attempt to escape, and may even bend his head and thorax toward the female's mouth so that she may munch her way through most of his body, while his abdomen remains to complete the job of injecting sperm into her. If one thinks of natural selection as the maximization of survival, such cannibalistic suicide makes no sense. Actually, natural selection maximizes the transmission of genes, and survival is in most cases just one strategy that provides repeated opportunities to transmit genes. Suppose that opportunities to transmit genes arise unpredictably and infrequently, and that the number of offspring produced by such opportunities increases with the female's nutritional condition. That's the case for some species of spiders and mantises living at low population densities. A male is lucky to encounter a female at all, and such luck is unlikely to strike twice. The male's best strategy is to produce as many offspring bearing his genes as possible out of his lucky find. The larger a female's nutritional reserves, the more calories and protein she has available to transform into eggs. If the male departed after mating, he would probably not find another female, and his continued survival would thus be useless. Instead, by encouraging the female to eat him, he enables her to produce more eggs bearing his genes. In addition, a female spider, whose mouth is distracted by munching a male's body, allows copulation with the male's genitalia to proceed for a longer time, resulting in more sperm transferred and more eggs fertilized. The male spider's evolutionary logic is impeccable, and seems bizarre to us only because other aspects of human biology make sexual cannibalism disadvantageous. Most men have more than one lifetime opportunity to copulate. Even well-nourished women usually give birth to only a single baby at a time, or at most twins, and a woman could not consume enough of a man's body at one sitting to improve significantly the nutritional basis for her pregnancy. This example illustrates the dependence of evolved sexual strategies on both ecological parameters and the parameters of a species' biology, both of which vary among species. Sexual cannibalism in spiders and mantises is favored by the ecological variables of low population densities and low encounter rates, and by the biological variables of a female's capacity to digest relatively large meals, and to increase her egg output considerably when well-nourished. Ecological parameters can change overnight if an individual colonizes a new type of habitat, but the colonizing individual carries with it a baggage of inherited biological attributes that can change only slowly, through natural selection. Hence it is not enough to consider a species' habitat and lifestyle, design on paper a set of sexual characteristics that would be well matched to that habitat and lifestyle, and then be surprised that those supposedly optimal sexual characteristics do not evolve. Instead, sexual evolution is severely constrained by inherited commitments and prior evolutionary history. For example, in most fish species a female lays eggs, and a male fertilizes those eggs outside the female's body. But in all placental mammal species and marsupials a female gives birth to live young rather than to eggs, and all mammal species practice internal fertilization, male sperm injected into the female's body. Live birth and internal fertilization involve so many biological adaptations and so many genes, that all placental mammals and marsupials have been firmly committed to those attributes for tens of millions of years. As we shall see, these inherited commitments help explain why there is no mammal species in which parental care is provided solely by the male, even in habitats where mammals live alongside fish and frog species, whose males are the sole providers of parental care. We can thus redefine the problem posed by our strange sexuality. Within the last 7 million years, our sexual anatomy diverged somewhat, our sexual physiology further, and our sexual behavior even more, from those of our closest relatives, the chimpanzees. Those divergences must reflect a divergence between humans and chimpanzees in environment and lifestyle. But those divergences were also limited by inherited constraints. What were the lifestyle changes and inherited constraints that molded the evolution of our weird sexuality? Chapter 2. Section 1. The Battle of the Sexes. In the preceding chapter we saw that our effort to understand human sexuality must begin by our distancing ourselves from our warped human perspective. We're exceptional animals in that our fathers and mothers often remain together after copulating and are both involved in rearing the resulting child. No one could claim that men's and women's parental contributions are equal. They tend to be grossly unequal in most marriages and societies. But most fathers make some contribution to their children, even if it's just food or defense or land rights. We take such contributions so much for granted that they're written into law. Divorced fathers owe child support, and even an unwed mother can sue a man for child support if genetic testing proves that he is her child's father. But that's our warped human perspective. Alas for sexual equality, we're aberrations in the animal world, and especially among mammals. If orangutans, giraffes, and most other mammal species could express their opinion, they would declare our child support laws absurd. Most male mammals have no involvement with either their offspring or their offspring's mother. After inseminating her, they are too busy seeking other females to inseminate. Male animals in general, not just male mammals, provide much less parental care, if any, than do females. Yet there are quite a few exceptions to this chauvinist pattern. In some bird species, such as phalaropes and spotted sandpipers, it's the male that does the work of incubating the eggs and rearing the chicks, while the female goes in search of another male to inseminate her again and to rear her next clutch. Males of some fish species, like seahorses and sticklebacks, and some amphibian males, like midwife toads, care for the eggs in the nest, or in their mouth, pouch, or back. How can we explain simultaneously this general pattern of female parental care, and also its numerous exceptions? The answer comes from the realization that genes for behavior, as well as for malaria resistance and teeth, are subject to natural selection. A behavior pattern that helps individuals of one animal species pass on their genes won't necessarily be helpful in another species. In particular, a male and female that have just copulated to produce a fertilized egg face a choice of subsequent behaviors. Should that male and female both leave the egg to fend for itself, and set to work on producing another fertilized egg, copulating either with the same partner, or with a different partner? On the one hand, a timeout from sex for the purpose of parental care might improve the chances of the first egg surviving. If so, that choice leads to further choices. Both the mother and the father could choose to provide the parental care, or just the mother could choose to do so, or just the father could. On the other hand, if the egg has a 1 in 10 chance of surviving even with no parental care, and if the time you devote to tending it would alternatively let you produce 1,000 more fertilized eggs, you'd be off leaving that first egg to fend for itself, and going on to produce more fertilized eggs. I've referred to these alternatives as choices. That word may seem to suggest that animals operate like human incision makers, consciously evaluating alternatives, and finally choosing the particular alternative that seems most likely to advance the animal's self-interest. Of course, that's not what happens. Many of the so-called choices actually are programmed into an animal's anatomy and physiology. For example, female kangaroos have chosen to have a pouch that can accommodate their young, but male kangaroos have not. Most or all of the remaining choices are ones that would be anatomically possible for either sex, but animals have programmed instincts that lead them to provide, or not to provide, parental care, and this instinctive choice of behavior can differ between sexes of the same species. For example, among parent birds, both male and female albatrosses, male, but not female ostriches, females, but not males of most hummingbird species, and no brush turkeys of either sex are instinctively programmed to bring food to their chicks, although both sexes of all of these species are physically and anatomically perfectly capable of doing so. The anatomy, physiology, and instincts underlying parental care are all programmed genetically by natural selection. Collectively, they constitute part of what biologists term a reproductive strategy. That is, genetic mutations or recombinations in a parent bird could strengthen or weaken the instinct to bring food to the chicks, and could do so differently in the two sexes of the same species. Those instincts are likely to have a big effect on the number of chicks that survive to carry on the parent's genes. It's obvious that a chick to which a parent brings food is more likely to survive, but we shall also see that a parent that foregoes bringing food to its chicks thereby gains other increased chances to pass on its genes. Hence the net effect of a gene that causes a parent bird instinctively to bring food to its chicks could be either to increase or to decrease the number of chicks carrying on the parent's genes, depending on ecological and biological factors that we shall discuss. Genes that specify the particular anatomical structures or instincts most likely to ensure the survival of offspring bearing the genes will tend to increase in frequency. This statement can be rephrased: anatomical structures and instincts that promote survival and reproductive success tend to become established, genetically programmed, by natural selection. But the need to make wordy statements such as these arises very often in any discussion of evolutionary biology. Hence biologists routinely resort to anthropomorphic language to condense such statements. For example, they say that an animal chooses to do something, or pursues a certain strategy. This shorthand vocabulary should not be misconstrued as implying that animals make conscious calculations. For a long time, evolutionary biologists thought of natural selection as somehow promoting the good of the species. In fact, natural selection operates initially on individual animals and plants. Natural selection is not just a struggle between species, entire populations, nor is it just a struggle between individuals of different species, nor just between conspecific individuals of the same age and sex. Natural selection can also be a struggle between parents and their offspring, or a struggle between mates, because the self-interests of parents and their offspring, or of father and mother, may not coincide. What makes individuals of one age and sex successful at transmitting their genes may not increase the success of other classes of individuals. In particular, while natural selection favors both males and females that leave many offspring, the best strategy for doing so may be different for fathers and mothers. That generates a built-in conflict between the parents, a conclusion that all too many humans don't need scientists to reveal to them. We make jokes about the battle of the sexes, but the battle is neither a joke nor an aberrant accident of how individual father or mothers behave on particular occasions. It is indeed perfectly true that behavior that is in a male's genetic interests may not necessarily be in the interests of his female co-parent, and vice versa. That cruel fact is one of the fundamental causes of human misery. Consider again the case of the male and female that have just copulated to produce a fertilized egg, and now face the choice of what to do next. If the egg has some chance of surviving unassisted, and if both the mother and the father could produce many more fertilized eggs in the time that they would devote to tending that first fertilized egg, then the interests of the mother and father coincide in deserting the egg. But now suppose that the newly fertilized, laid, or hatched egg, or newborn offspring has absolutely zero chance of surviving unless it is cared for by one parent. Then there is indeed a conflict of interest. Should one parent succeed in foisting the obligation of parental care onto the other parent, and then going off in search of a new sex partner, then the foister will have advanced her or his genetic interests at the expense of the abandoned parent. The foister will really promote his or her selfish evolutionary goals by deserting his or her mate and offspring. In such cases, when care by one parent is essential for offspring survival, child rearing can be thought of as a cold-blooded race between mother and father, to be the first to desert the other and their mutual offspring, and to get on with the business of producing more babies. Whether it actually pays you to desert depends on whether you can count on your old mate to finish rearing the kids, and whether you are then likely to find a receptive new mate. It's as if, at the moment of fertilization, the mother and father play a game of chicken, stare at each other, and simultaneously say, "I am going to walk off and find a new partner, and you can care for this embryo if you want to, but even if you don't, I won't." If both partners call each other's bluff in that race to desert their embryo, then the embryo dies, and both parents lose the game of chicken. Which parent is more likely to back down? The answer depends on such considerations as which parent has more invested in the fertilized egg, and which parent has hotter alternative prospects. As I said before, neither parent makes a conscious calculation. The actions of each parent are instead programmed genetically by natural selection into the anatomy and instincts of their sex. In many animal species the female backs down and becomes sole parent, while the male deserts, but in other species the male assumes responsibility, and the female deserts, and in still other species both parents assume shared responsibility. Those varying outcomes depend on three interrelated sets of factors, whose differences between the sexes vary among species: investment in the already fertilized embryo or egg, alternative opportunities that would be foreclosed by further care of the already fertilized embryo or egg, and confidence in the paternity or maternity of the embryo or egg. All of us know from experience that we are much more reluctant to walk away from an ongoing enterprise in which we have invested a lot, and from one in which we have invested only a little. That's true of our investments in human relationships, in business projects, or in the stock market. It's true regardless of whether our investment is in the form of money, time, or effort. We lightly end a relationship that turns bad on the first date, and we stop trying to construct from parts a cheap toy when we hit a snag within a few minutes. But we agonize over ending a 25-year marriage, or an expensive house remodeling. The same principle applies to parental investment in potential offspring. Even at the moment when an egg is fertilized by a sperm, the resulting fertilized embryo generally represents a greater investment for the female, and for the male, because in most animal species the egg is much larger than the sperm. While both eggs and sperm contain chromosomes, the egg in addition must contain enough nutrients and metabolic machinery to support the embryo's further development for some time, at least until the embryo can start feeding itself. Sperm, in contrast, need contain only a flagellar motor and sufficient energy to drive that motor and support swimming for at most a few days. As a result, a mature human egg has roughly 1 million times the mass of the sperm that fertilizes it. The corresponding factor for kiwis is 1 million billion. Hence a fertilized embryo, viewed simply as an early-stage construction project, represents an utterly trivial investment of its father's body mass compared to its mother's. But that doesn't mean that the female has automatically lost the game of chicken before the moment of conception. Along with the one sperm that fertilized the egg, the male may have produced several 100 million other sperm in the ejaculate, so that his total investment may be not dissimilar to the female's. Chapter 2. Section 2. The Battle of the Sexes. The act of fertilizing an egg is described as either internal or external, depending on whether it takes place inside or outside the female's body. External fertilization characterizes most species of fish and amphibia. For example, in most fish species a female and a nearby male simultaneously discharge their eggs and sperm into the water, where fertilization occurs. With external fertilization, the females obligate investment at the moment she extrudes the eggs. The embryos may then be left to float away and fend for themselves without parental care, or they may receive care from one parent, depending on the species. More familiar to humans is internal fertilization, the male's injection of sperm, for example, via an intromittent penis, into the female's body. What happens next in most species is that the female does not immediately extrude the embryos, but retains them in her body for a period of development, until they are closer to the stage when they can survive by themselves. The offspring may eventually be packaged for release within a protective eggshell, together with an energy supply, in the form of yolk, as in all birds, many reptiles, and monotreme mammals, the platypus and echidnas of Australia and New Guinea. Alternatively, the embryo may continue to grow within the mother until the embryo is born without an eggshell instead of being laid as an egg. That alternative, termed vivipary, Latin, for live birth, characterizes us and all other mammals except monotremes, plus some fish, reptiles, and amphibia. Vivipary requires specialized internal structures, of which the mammalian placenta is the most complex for the transfer of nutrients from the mother to her developing embryo, and the transfer of wastes from embryo to mother. Internal fertilization thus obligates the mother to further investment in the embryo beyond the investment that she has already made in producing the egg until it is fertilized. Either she uses calcium and nutrients from her own body to make an eggshell and yolk, or else she uses her nutrients to make the embryo's body itself. Besides that investment of nutrients, the mother is also obligated to invest the time required for pregnancy. The result is that the investment of an internally fertilized mother at the time of hatching or birth, relative to the father's, is likely to be much greater than that of an externally fertilized mother at the time of unfertilized egg extrusion. For instance, by the end of a 9-month pregnancy, a human mother's expenditure of time and energy is colossal in comparison with her husband's or boyfriend's pathetically slight investment during the few minutes it took him to copulate and extrude his 1 milliliter of sperm. As a result of that unequal investment of mothers and fathers in internally fertilized embryos, it becomes harder for the mother to bluff her way out of post-hatching or post-birth parental care, if any is required. That care takes many forms, for instance, lactation by female mammals, guarding the eggs by female alligators, and brooding the eggs by female pythons. Nevertheless, as we shall see, there are other circumstances that may induce the father to stop bluffing, and to start assuming shared, or even sole responsibility for his offspring. I mentioned that 3 related sets of factors influence the choice of parent to be caretaker, and that relative size of investment in the young is only one of those factors. A second factor is foreclosed opportunity. Picture yourself as an animal parent contemplating your newborn offspring, and coldly calculating your genetic self-interest as you debate what you should now do with your time. That offspring bears your genes and its chance of surviving to perpetuate